Hello and welcome to the Bond Revisited podcast with me, Tom.
And me, Joe.
So we're back once again. We keep disappearing and then coming back, but we actually have some Bond news, which means we get to come back and actually talk about something that is relevant, which is very different to what we've been doing recently, which is talking about any versions of Casino Royale we could find online.
Wait,
But
so
what?
that means we don't have to talk about terrible non-Eon films today.
Well, well, I've got some bad news about that. I guess the good news is that it's not Casino Royale again. How many Casino Royales are there then? There's the book. There was the climax episode.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what would you call it? Just the 1967 one.
The Freaky Deaky one, yeah.
The Freaky Deaky one, yeah. And then the Daniel Craig one.
Yeah.
And we covered them all.
I think you could start throwing in comics. I think there's a comic book version of it.
Oh yeah, let's get the comic book in there. For
yeah,
sure.
No more though.
And that level in Quantum of Solace, that video game, Casino Royale was in there too. So that's 6, let's say.
But we're not reviewing those, are we?
Not yet.
Okay,
no.
Thank God. All right, good.
At some point. But I suppose a little bit of housekeeping before we get into stuff, because we are going to be talking about the big Bond news. But yeah, I guess going forward, things are just going to be a little bit more ad hoc from our side, I guess. We've done all the films, we did some bonus stuff, so now it's just, is there some Bond stuff? Do we feel like talking about that Bond stuff? If the answer is yes and yes, then you're going to hear our voices. If it's a no and no, then, well, you won't hear our voices, I guess, unless you listen to an older episode, which if you do, thank you. We appreciate that.
Absolutely. I mean, if there's a new Bond film that comes out anytime soon, I will want to add it to the ranking. But actually,
we have to.
By that
right?
point, my ranking probably would have changed all over again because it's going to have been 15 years until the next Bond film or whatever. But, it will need to be done. So, yeah, we have to come back.
Well, I think by that point, everyone's going to be saying how Die Another Day is actually fantastic. It's actually super underrated. That somehow is going to come back around. I think that's what's going to happen.
It's going to have the On Her Majesty's Secret Service treatment. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Because quite a lot of Bond films have kind of switched, I guess. There's only a few that have been very consistent, I suppose.
Yeah.
We're probably 5 years away from everyone saying Spectre is a top 5 film.
Never.
I don't think we're too far away from that.
Then I want to be in the cold ground by that point.
You have no interest in that conversation.
Just will me off. Just chuck me in the sea by that point, because I do not want to live in a world where Spectre is at the top of any list.
Oh, just you only live twice. Is that what you're saying? And then you're come back in a body bag.
Yes.
After we throw you in the ocean.
Yeah, something like that. That'd be good.
Yeah. That sounds cool. Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to you, Joe, to explain, because I think a lot has happened since we last spoke on the podcast anyway. So what has been going on in the world of James Bond?
Well, thank you for asking, Tom.
No worries. No worries.
If you will, let me just indulge for a little while, just a little while, a few minutes of talking about some recent Bond history. Because us Bond fans, we don't get a lot of news these days. It's usually few and far between. So I thought I'd go back to when No Time to Die was released and just sort of go from there, what we've heard so far, what's changed in terms of production and the Bond franchise, and how we've reached the most recent news article and what we're going to talk about afterwards, okay? So
are you about to cover nearly 3.5 years? Is that what you're telling me?
And it will take 1 minute.
Okay, well,
No.
I'm going to throw myself in the ocean while you do that.
No, okay. When I was writing this out, I was like, oh, okay, there has been a fair amount that's been happening James Bond-wise, but just a lot of it is not really to do with the films and new films coming out, which is why it feels like you just, we're getting nothing. But, so let's go from No Time to Die, right? Which in itself was an interesting adventure with the next Bond film, Daniel Craig's last Bond film to be coming out.
We talked about it for over 7 hours.
Oh, that's
I think
right, we did.
I think we covered that film quite well.
But that was due to various factors, Danny Boyle dropping out, COVID. That was delayed about 9 times. various points from 2019 up to 2021. But obviously, the film did eventually come out September 2021, and Craig's last film. So there was always that expectation that there was going to be a bit of a gap, but whilst they find the next James Bond, which is to be expected. After that, November 2020, next bit of Bond news, Project 007, which is the video game currently being made by Interactive IO. However, no news since then. Games take a long time. We've heard nada.
I think there's been a little bit right here and there, just no proper trailers, no concrete things, but I think there's been a little bit of info, but like tiny specks of info.
Yes, very, very small sprinkles from, maybe like a developer just really quickly talking about it in an interview. Not enough for my liking, but anyway, I don't know enough about making games. It's fine. Next up, MGM. Okay, so go back a little bit longer. They declared bankruptcy, MGM, in 2010. They're the film distributor for the James Bond films. Well, partially. Some of them are done by Columbia Pictures, I think it is. But anyway, MGM is what you think of, right, when you think of Bond. They declared bankruptcy back in 2010 and various years of legal stuff. By 2020, they were looking to be bought, right? They were looking for buyers because they had loads of debt. So at the time, people were thinking, oh, maybe it will be someone like Apple, Amazon, I don't know. And obviously, eventually it was Amazon. So May 2021, Amazon acquires MGM and that whole deal closed.
There was a bidding war, wasn't there, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Between who?
I don't know, whoever, Apple.
I don't know. I can't recall that. I knew that Apple was in... People said, oh, that would make sense for Apple because they were sort of starting Apple TV at the time, so it would make sense for them to do it. I don't know if there actually was any bidding war, though.
Okay, it was a long time ago. I remember, maybe it was just multiple people being attached to it.
Yeah. So that deal eventually closes in March 2022. They buy MGM for $8.5 billion. But here's the caveat. Here's the important thing. As part of that deal, the Broccoli family, so Barbara Broccoli, we've mentioned her a lot in previous episodes, and Michael G. Wilson, they retained creative control of James Bond. So although Amazon owns MGM, they've still got creative freedom. Great. Then, very, very small thing, that Cypher 007 game came out for mobile. Still haven't played that. That's on Apple Arcade, September 2023, that happened. Really should play that.
That's still going.
Yeah.
Is anyone going to check in on that?
I know it had one update, I think, in that time. But
oh, nice. Cool. Yeah. So we Bond fans have actually had it pretty good. Okay. Doing okay.
After that, November 2023, we had 007 Road to a Million, greenlit by Amazon Prime Videos, which is that sort of race against the world thing, barely even linked to Bond, but it was something that was actually being made before even being acquired by Amazon, apparently. So,
oh, interesting. I didn't know that. I always assumed it was a very Amazon thing, but okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And I tried watching a bit of it, didn't love it. That could be a separate episode. No, actually, that's just not worth it.
No.
Anyway, we're getting a bit more recent now. November 2024. So there was an honorary Academy Award thing going on for Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson. And as they're doing their acceptance speeches, Michael G. Wilson, he's 82 years old at this point. So he starts to hint at his retirement. He kind of quotes that, him working with, I think it's his half sister. I think that's the relationship, or stepsister. I don't know. But
I think, isn't it like he married? Oh, I can't. I shouldn't try and guess. But yeah, I think it is a step thing because I think it is by marriage.
Right.
They're somewhat related, I think.
So he was quoted as saying, "I think it worked out pretty well. We were a good team." So in the past tense, implying that he's kind of done with it. So that was November last year, and then December hit with the big Wall Street Journal article, and this was where a lot of people started to make videos, and there's kind of the first big bit of Bond news for a long time. And
the Cypher update. That's when that happened.
Hell no. No, it was a Wall Street article, which was, "Where is James Bond? Trapped in an ugly stalemate with Amazon." And it was a really good article. If you haven't read it, I suggest you do. It kind of just goes into the nitty gritty between what's happened with the Broccoli family and sort of the Amazon board and how that relationship broke down. Barbara Broccoli doesn't trust Amazon, and they're kind of, the two sides have come to a bit of an impasse. And there's some great quotes in there. There's a quote from Barbara Broccoli apparently referring to Amazon as "these people are effing idiots," and quoting how, well, it's actually something that her father, Cubby Broccoli, apparently told her, which was, "Don't have temporary people make permanent decisions about the Bond franchise," which is very interesting given what comes next. So that was a big bit of news, people wondering what's happening. And it kind of explained why there'd been no movement maybe on the next Bond script and Bond film, Bond actor. And then we reach now. So we're recording this towards the end of February 2025, and there was a press release by Amazon MGM Studios, and they've announced a new joint venture with Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli. And what that means is Michael G. Wilson, he is effectively retiring. He said he's stepping back in favour of art and charitable projects. And alongside that, Barbara Broccoli has said, quoting, "With the conclusion of No Time to Die and Michael retiring from the films, I feel it's time to focus on my other projects." And so, though they're going to remain co-owners of Bond, the important thing now is that the intellectual property rights will be under a joint venture, and Amazon now gain creative control of the Bond franchise. And that's where we're at.
And everyone's just like, that's cool. And that's that.
And no one
very
reacted.
Measured reason. Yeah, just a very small, good to know, best of luck, and everyone moved on.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you all very much for watching.
Nice and easy
listening.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. I feel like, yeah, there's a lot to unpack. I guess before we got this news, it was definitely interesting to see how Barbara Broccoli was being talked about by fans, because we did have this long period of nothing, and my takeaway was that people were getting very frustrated with her and was like, what's going on? And then when this article came out before about the issues, everyone then seemed to kind of switch, because then it became Barbara Broccoli against Amazon and screw Amazon. So there was it was quite interesting for me to see this whole, I feel like Barbara was kind of being seen as a little bit of a villainous character, but all of this stuff is going to put her in a very good light. And now people have just gone the complete other way, because the alternative was, well, now Amazon is just going to take over, and now it's their baby instead of the original creative team.
That is definitely true. I think that article back in December did change a lot of people's perceptions. It changed mine slightly. It made her feel more like a protector of the franchise against the evil forces of Amazon. Although me personally, I didn't really get that much sympathy for her either at the same time, because I do get the impression that legitimately she has kind of just fallen out of interest with the Bond stuff, which I don't blame. Yeah. I don't blame her for. Like, she's been doing it pretty much her whole kind of working life, right? Starting off working under her father, so I can understand that she'd probably want to do some other things, and maybe I know there's been talk about her doing other projects with Daniel Craig, like Othello and stuff like that. Like, she probably is a bit done with it. But then I would, in my opinion, would like her to have then done something to, propel it maybe without her as much. I don't know. Yeah, it's tricky.
Like, to be fair, she and Michael and that team created such a definitive endpoint for the franchise. And then, of course, the Amazon being, Amazon buying MGM, that's not on her, that's not on Michael, that's not on that team necessarily. But they kind of almost set some of this stuff up by making it such a definitive, spoilers, by the way, killing off Bond.
Yeah.
And then just having this big break afterwards, which is just something we have never experienced. And consistency has always been a major part of the Bond franchise. Like, one of the longest gaps was between like Casino Royale and Die Another Day, and that was 4 years. I think the actual longest gap is License to Kill to GoldenEye. But in both those occurrences, those were a huge deal. And now it's like we got to this No Time to Die and it had this definitive ending and then this big break. And it's like, well, you kind of set this up yourself. So, like, put yourself in the position to just say no and I'm kind of done and to move on, like, and I feel like before the Bond films weren't made like that. They were made in a way that meant you were always going to get a new one. It was built into the DNA of what that franchise was and was always trying to do. And then this creative team did something that completely went against that. Now, I like that film. I'm not making this point to say it was bad, but it feels like, well, it's built into what you did. So sure, maybe you do want to move on, but you also created a film that really let you easily move on and wash your hands of it. So again, I kind of agree. The sympathy thing, I'm not 100%, I'm not saying I'm pro Amazon, but I'm not 100% sympathetic because, well, some of this was on you from a creative standpoint. That's what you made.
I do wonder then, I mean, you saying that, yeah, do you think that when they were writing and producing No Time to Die, they, in the back of their mind, kind of knew this was going to be it for them? Because you're right, it was such a strange decision from a Bond fan perspective, but maybe that was them having the foresight to think, Joe, what, I've probably not got another one in me, so let's end the franchise, or let's end the character now under my terms, and whatever happens to it in the future, that's someone else's problem.
Yeah, I feel like there was a little bit of that. Maybe it wasn't quite so direct when they were making the film, but even if No Time to Die came out on time, that was April 2020 was when it was meant to come out, right? Because the Billie Eilish song came out in February, and then we hit March and all that stuff happened, because I think it got delayed very late. So even then, that was 5 years, because Spectre was 2015, and then Daniel Craig, he was leaving and stuff like that. It did very much feel like that. But again, if they were more, I don't think they were necessarily saying we're going to axe this stuff, but it does feel like if they were more open to keep it going, they would have done more to lay that groundwork rather than literally in the first time in the entire franchise's history, slap that reset button so hard that they then opened the door for them to be like, actually, maybe I want to do something else now. But it just seemed like a collective effort to set that up for themselves.
I just wonder why it took, or why it's taken 4 years. I mean, maybe it was the breakdown in the relationship with Amazon. Maybe there was some money involved. I don't know. I assume there has to be quite a lot of money involved somewhere.
Oh,
in this.
like we can talk about creative stuff, but with this sort of thing, yeah, it has to be money in some way.
Yeah, I wonder if that was just the final thing for them. Is like, well, we're getting on. Just take the money and run. And it's a shame, because I think one of the things that a lot of people talk about when it comes to James Bond is the fact that unlike every other, well, not every other, but most other big media franchises, look at things like Star Wars and what's happened to that under Kathleen Kennedy and kind of Disney, the Disney board, people would say they've killed Star Wars, right? Whereas Bond was always this thing that was sort of kept in the family, and it had this like I was saying, sort of this protective bubble around it of the Broccolis and their history making the films and what they knew and their experiences, and you felt like they had its best interests. I'm not sure I actually agree with all of that, but I think that's what a lot of people felt, and that's now going away, and it is just going to become another thing similar to Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm in two minds about that, because I kind of agree. It's like keeping it in the family made it super unique, and the James Bond franchise was kind of super unique, and it is a shame for that to go. But at the same time, they weren't consistent. This isn't like an amazing creative team that made these amazing films every time. The whole reason we were able to do this podcast is because a load of them are actually not great.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
They just always turn around and make something good. So, like, if you did the headline "People Behind Quantum of Solace Lee franchise," you'd be like, "Cool, sounds good to me."
Yeah.
Keep them away, or "People Behind Die Another Day" for the more direct example, or "People Behind Spectre" for some people. Spectre, Die Another Day team step away from the franchise, you'd be like, cool, all right, good. Now we can all move on. It's just, the one thing that was nice is that they did always come back with something really good. But if you want to kind of talk about what they delivered across the eras, or I guess specifically when it was Barbara Broccoli's and Michael G. Wilson's franchise, they weren't super consistent with it. But again, I'm still sad that it's not going to feel the same because it can't feel the same. They did bring something to that across the franchise, or across all the films over the years. But at the same time, it's like if we want to talk about quality, Bond has survived by being very inconsistent with quality, by always being able to bounce back, which funnily enough fits his character quite well. But like you can't defend everything that they did. So if we want to just completely remove the Amazon aspect from it for the time being, fresh blood, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. You do lose something, but if you can get the right people involved, that step might actually be positive, especially with how the Daniel Craig era ended with No Time to Die.
Damn it, Tom. I'm slightly upset. And you know why?
No.
You know why? So just as a little note to listeners, Tom and I have not discussed this beforehand. This is like the first time we're talking about this together.
We haven't talked in months. This has been.
I hate this guy, but but I was really hoping that we would have differing opinions, and it seems like we haven't got onto Amazon yet, but it sounds like we're both very much in agreement about this because I would totally agree that I think that the way that the Bond films have been made for the past 60 years, 60 years, great, but it's not a sustainable thing. Okay, like at some point, Barbara Broccoli, Michael G. Wilson were going to step aside. Maybe they would have had children who would be interested in doing it. I think there is actually someone like that who does actually help with the films, but clearly not enough to kind of keep that reign going. And given the quality of some of the most recent films and just the general sort of theme that they've got going with the Craig films, which is now over, obviously, but it wasn't to everyone's cup of tea, the way that they made the Daniel Craig era of films. I think a shake-up is actually really needed. Whether it turns out to be a terrible decision or not, from right now, I just think it's exciting, right? Like it's exciting to see what's going to come next. Might be awful, but it might be great. And it's going to be a shake-up to the franchise.
Yeah, I think, outside of the context of what's happened, I would imagine most people would agree with that. That's what the franchise needed. That's what has kind of happened. And we can debate the specifics of that and about what that should be. You hear people about saying go back to the Cold War. I don't think that's a good idea at all.
No.
But ultimately, whatever was going to happen was going to be a reset. And the biggest reset before this point was Casino Royale. And this is probably going to be a bigger reset than that. Like, with the... or if it's not, you're going to try and keep everything the same, and it's probably just not going to work. So it would... because, you've done it before, and it's a long-running franchise. You have to keep it, like, familiar but fresh at the same time, which is very hard to do. So a fresh set of people to come in and do that to me makes sense. And I guess I just want to make it clear, I've been a little bit negative about Barbara and Michael G. Wilson. I think that's not how I'm feeling about it. I do feel like they were good at what they did, and we got a lot of really great films because of them. And I'm not kind of looking back on them as in like, oh, well, they sucked anyway. It was, it's kind of a shame, but I guess I'm not super sad they're gone. They had a really solid era, which was pretty inconsistent, but they also, they made some of the worst, but they made some of the best. And I think I'm trying to keep it balanced, and we should be considering all of that in terms of like them stepping aside. But to me, it just comes together as in like, it makes sense for them to kind of step aside at this point of time. But again, I'm not trying to like make them out as they were terrible. They weren't terrible. That's not fair.
No.
It's just, if we were going to do it, there's positives to doing this, which we might look, I might sound very silly in like 5 years' time saying this, and in retrospect. But that at this point of time, I think there's a real logic to it. and that they did a lot of good things, they did a lot of bad things. Close the book, or close the, end this chapter, and let's start a new chapter for the franchise.
Yeah, yeah, and to be fair, after all of this is settled, after the dust has settled on this, the fact is that Eon Productions, who have made all the Bond films, that is still a thing. It's still a film producing company. So there's nothing to say, I doubt it, but there is nothing to stop Amazon still using them to make the Bond films. It could still feel like the films that we've known and loved or hated, as depending on what they were. So it's not like everything's going to change now. It could easily still feel familiar in many ways.
Yes. And I guess it's probably worth mentioning the casting director also left recently.
Oh, I can't think of her name, but yeah, she's been there for a long time, hasn't she? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the news articles have been like she was there for the last 3 Bonds that have been cast.
Yeah.
So there is like this big changing of the guard for the franchise. Like I wouldn't be surprised if a few more people, names we don't really know, but just people who have been involved kind of end up dropping away. But also I wouldn't be surprised if people like, I'm kicking myself now. What's the composer's name?
David Arnold?
David Arnold.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if we hear like, he's doing the new one or something, right? Like potentially some people come back. I don't know, but I think there's a reshuffling going on. Some people are going to go. If we're lucky, some people come back, but that's just where we're at. And when the top people leave, it's going to have that knock-on effect. But that could also mean David gets a paycheck and he gets to come back. And
I'd be
he
very
would definitely
happy.
say yes.
Yeah, he loves Bond.
He can't get enough of Bond, legitimately.
Right. Well, I want to move on just slightly. I want to ask you a question because we've talked about the broccoli side of it. Let's talk about the Amazon side of it. I want to know your thoughts on Amazon now having the creative control.
It's, Amazon is such a strange streaming surface because they're just inconsistent, which is true for like any of them. But like Disney, I would say, is like the content mill of we have big franchises. We are just a complete monster blob of like pop culture. And we're just going to keep spewing on everyone as much as possible because we have it all.
On me.
No, you pay for it. Because they're just so big and massive, just in terms of what they own. And then a lot of the other ones, I don't think I like that in the same way. So like Netflix are the more, I guess they're a lot more about original programs, but they are quite, you either get something like, that's really cool, or it's a lot of not, they haven't been great recently, to be honest. They're all about the viral hits, but they just haven't had as many recently, I don't think anyway. Or maybe I'm just getting old. It's probably that.
Yeah.
And then the rest are just like, we're Paramount. Do you want to watch South Park? We got South Park. So that's pretty cool. And then there's like Amazon, who doesn't really own anything or have much experience in this. And they're just trying to get stuff out there. And then sometimes it like works. Like, it's not like, it's nice to think about, Amazon are just sucking at this. I don't think that's true. Like The Boys is obviously the most famous one, right? But there's all these shows that do come out from Amazon, so like, that's not bad. It's not bad at all. And then just sometimes they just put out stuff which is awful. And then sometimes you have stuff like Rings of Power, which I wouldn't say is that bad, but for how much they spent on it, it's also not that good either. So in terms of like, this is a safe pair of hands for the franchise, well, the answer is no. They're really not. But at the same time, I don't think they're quite... You would think they would be a bigger disaster for what the idea of Amazon Prime Video was. So I feel like there's a chance. There's not a high chance. Actually, no, let me take a step back a bit. I think what's going to happen is that it's going to be mediocre. I think that's what Amazon's going to make. I think they're going to make a mediocre Bond that is okay, that is just very lacking in personality. It ticks some of the boxes the fans want, but they're just going to go through their process of trying to like make it as perfect as possible and throw all this money and people at it, and then it'll come out and it won't be a terrible, terrible thing. It will be okay. And I'm not super happy about that, but that's my prediction. Because again, I think Amazon are not actually this flaming wreck that you would think they would be, but also they're just so inconsistent that you can't trust that they're actually going to make it good.
Well, I've got some news for you, Tom. I've actually heard
right.
straight from whoever the head of Amazon is, and they've told me.
Whoever that person is.
And he's told me what they're going to do in the next Bond film. I'm going to tell you what it is.
Oh, that's good to know.
I did have a little bit of sway when I spoke to him about this. They are going to use AI de-aging, face swapping.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to bring back Roger Moore. Troy Baker's voicing him. And they're going to do... What? Why are you laughing?
It's funny that you said Roger Moore. Like, anyone else would have said Sean Connery, but you're like, don't worry. Even for this bit, you can't. You have to say Roger Moore.
I'm not going to betray Sir Rog like that. Yeah, no. No.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think, yes, mediocre is the most likely option. And I think it's going to be similar to when Disney made the first Star Wars film, and they played it incredibly safe with Force Awakens. It was basically A New Hope, because they just got this new franchise. They didn't really know what they were doing with it. That's another problem with Star Wars, but they figured let's just kind of hit the same beats. And I think it makes the most sense that Amazon would do that as well. It's either that or they kind of go like completely the opposite and do something really weird and different, but I can't see that happening. And I think people like to moan about Amazon, but there could have been arguments for any of them. If it was Disney, if it was Apple, everyone loves Apple at the moment because of things like Severance, sure, but people would come up with arguments why Apple would be terrible for Bond as well. So I don't really think there was a perfect answer to who could take Bond after this. I don't think Amazon is terrible. Amazon did Fallout, right? That was Fallout?
Yeah.
And I thought that was... I think Fallout fans have said that's pretty good in terms of like video games to TV.
It's a good TV show. Yeah.
Kind of faithful.
Amazon can make something decent.
Yeah, I started watching it, but I think it's probably going to be mediocre. But I'm at the stage now as a James Bond fan. Maybe this isn't good take, but I will take something mediocre rather than nothing at all, which is what I think it would have been the case if things hadn't have changed. At least not for a long time. I think that's the
name of the new film, isn't it? Mediocre or Nothing at All. I think that's what they're going to call it.
Mediocre or Nothing at All. Die tomorrow. Gold.
Die mediocre or Nothing at all.
All the board, all the members around the board are like thinking, okay, we need to get gold in there. Die.
Yep.
Finger. Gold. Die tomorrow. Okay. But another thing I think, and it kind of links back to the mediocre stuff that we were saying, there's in the response to this news, a lot of stuff on YouTube, a lot of stuff in the internet, articles, and there is. You would hate to see it because a lot of it is obviously algorithm, clickbaiting, all that sort of stuff, and it's kind of going to the extremes of the James Bond franchise is going to die. James Bond has already died, but the James Bond franchise is going to die. Amazon are going to kill it. They're going to start pumping out money penny TV series and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And I maybe I'm just naively optimistic, but I just really can't see that sort of content pumping happening anytime soon with James Bond under Amazon. I really can't.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so either. And I don't think it's again, I don't want to defend Amazon too much because this could be bad. I feel like a lot of this conversation we're having is more of a response to the way some people are freaked out about this more than anything. But yeah, I've seen a lot of that stuff too, the idea of the extended James Bond universe. And I would just love to see the evidence that Amazon would do that. Because as far as I can tell, Disney are the only ones who do that. And it took them a really long time to get to that point. And they already had like this framework and all these massive franchises to be able to do that off of. And I just feel like Amazon don't have precedent for that. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. It absolutely could. But I think Amazon are, they can be dumb, but I don't think they're so dumb that they don't understand that any sort of reboot of the franchise starts with a good James Bond film. Like it has to start on that. Like that again, looking at the Disney example, which I don't think is too fair because it's Disney, they're a very unique beast. You know, I know maybe it feels like just because of how much they own, it feels like they're kind of all over everything, but they are their own thing, doing their own thing. But the Star Wars stuff, as you said, it started with The Force Awakens, a solid base of which they could launch the rest of all these extra stuff off of. And that took years to build. Like, we didn't have all this extra stuff in between. I guess there's Rogue One, but then like people like Rogue One. But like it didn't quite work out that way. And even like the MCU started out with a few films that linked together. And this kind of TV spin-off stuff, sure, it's the current trend. So I guess you could see why a TV company would want to do that, or people would assume that. But these always start off with just a solid film that people like, and making sure they get the Bond casting right, and making sure they're got the universe correct and that people are on board. I don't think they'll go crazy until that happens. And so it can only happen if we get a good film that people like. And what's maybe more likely to happen is that they put out a film, it's just okay. The fans are just like, meh, Bond isn't a big enough name to kind of support what they want to do. And then it just kind of goes away.
Oh no.
That's probably the likely situation that would be terrible.
Yeah.
And I think that's more likely than the idea of just like the young Q or whatever people are talking about, because I think it just doesn't make sense for a company to invest all of that money in all these projects at the same time without any kind of guarantees on that. And Disney are the only ones who did that. And even Disney, it took years to build that. So we are years away from that even potentially happening with James Bond and Amazon.
Yeah. Well, Amazon, how much did they pay? I'll put it up there. 8.5 billion, right? They paid 8.5 billion for MGM and partial, Bond underneath that back in March 2022. So let's be honest. There's no way of thinking otherwise. They want money, right? That's what a company wants. Capitalism. They want a lot of money. I have a feeling that they're not an artist. They don't care about James Bond on that level. They're going to want income. What's the best way of getting money? It's a James Bond film, right? No Time to Die made huge amount of money. I think it was like maybe just under Skyfall. I'm not sure if
I think Skyfall might have made more.
Skyfall made $1 billion, but
yeah,
No Time to Die was close.
I think it was not as much as I think Spectre might have made more, but just because it was the post-lockdown stuff that was still having an effect for No Time to Die. I want to say it was like 770 million, something like that.
So it's still pretty good. Like Bond is still a cinema bringer, right? People come and watch Bond in the cinema, and that's part of what Barbara Broccoli. I think there's a whole thing about how she was insistent that Bond stayed on the cinema screen during COVID, and there was no home rental stuff going on. So it would make sense for them if they want money to make another film. So that is for sure going to be the first thing they do. They're not going to come out with a young Bond, James Bond Jr. reboot.
Oh.
They're not going to do that. Now, if that does come later on, and we get stuff like that, and we get a young Q, and we get some more James Bond games or whatever, great. I don't care if it's terrible. If we get the film and the film's fine, I can't see myself getting. This will be a really good test of like in a few years' time listening back to this. But as it stands at the moment, where we're in such a drought, I will take all the stuff. I will take all of the side things and whatever they make, as long as it's alongside a main, film stream. I really could not care less if they start to pump out stuff because I won't have to watch it. I don't think people will watch it. I think, Bond isn't really a cinematic universe. It's a character. I don't know if they can make something about the history of M or the history of Moneypenny or the history of Q interesting. I'd be keen to see if they could, but I don't think they can. So really, they just have to focus on the Bond character. That's all they really can do.
Yes. Yeah, again, it's Star Wars is a very different beast, and especially Marvel. Like that's a completely different beast to watch what Bond is in. But yeah, I think you touched upon something like, and that is probably a big concern for me as well, that Amazon could turn around and say we're launching this not in the cinema, and that would be, I think that is on the table, and that would really suck. And I think that is one of the worst things they can do. Like Bond, you know, you can talk about the creative aspects of the franchise and what direction it should go on, but like it's a franchise that started in 1962, so that should stay. That should stay as a film. So I do really hope that happens. That would be another situation I wouldn't be happy with if it was like a TV show to start off with. You know, it does need to start with the film, and I do feel like it makes the most sense to do that. But as you kind of say, like, I guess people are kind of upset with the way Star Wars are being used and stuff, but you are kind of correct. You don't have to watch all of it. You know, I feel like the Star Wars stuff gets criticized because they stopped making films, and the last one, episode 9, was so bloody awful.
Yeah.
Like, that's the problem here. Like, that's the conversation. Like, oh, that film was awful. And then you know, that was the problem.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of this stuff is kind of come from, is that film was awful, and then a lot of the TV stuff has just been mixed, but there's still been some good TV stuff. But even then, I go back to my former point of it takes a while to get to that point, and I don't think Amazon is going to be willing to invest a ton of money right off the bat for Bond to kind of make this a possibility until they've got a little bit more of a guarantee. Because just because they made all these shows or spin-offs and stuff doesn't mean they're going to make any money off them. You know, it's not free real estate in that way. It's not as in like it's worth them to invest more money to keep churning this stuff out. It has to make sense per project. And at the moment, what makes sense? Well, you got to reboot Bond, and that's a huge task. And hopefully they can get the right people to do that, and then Bond hopefully will be back.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. There's a part of me now that's just excited that there is a group of people who are, you know, have the ability to do this. They have the control to do this, that are actually going to be invested in doing it. So it might actually happen within my lifetime.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, hopefully. Hopefully I don't drop dead tomorrow. But, things should speed up now, right? They've got the control. They're going to want to see the returns. It's got to. And that, I'm not saying I don't want I'm not saying I want it to be rushed, but just any speed faster than glacial is fine by me.
Yeah, I guess, like, when you think about it, you know, would it be better if they actually stayed on? If Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson stayed on? I guess that's one of these questions. Because at the end of the day, Amazon has bought them. That has been done. You know, we can talk about hypotheticals in terms of a more abstract sense of, oh, it would be better if MGM was never bought by Amazon. But if you then say that, then it's like, well, who would buy them? Wouldn't it just go under? Well, isn't that another complete mess? But, you know, the hypothetical situation of what was being presented for all these years when nothing was happening was that Amazon was just the people paying the money and were the ones who would put it on their streaming service, and these guys would go and make their film. And I guess the question is, would we have been better off with that system? And I think the answer, and I think it's the answer that Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson came to, and is why they made this decision, is no. It just wouldn't have worked. And I don't even like it. Just sounded like it wouldn't have worked. I don't think it's that bad that Barbara Broccoli said, like, effing idiots. Like, point to one TV show production team where the creative people don't call the heads effing idiots. Like, that seems quite tame, to be honest. That feels like part of the process for me. But it seems like they finally got to that point of, like, actually, this isn't going to be better for everyone to do it this way. And perhaps we're worse off for it. But at this moment of time, it's like, that clearly wasn't working. And consistency with Bond is a big part of the franchise. And it's something that has been very lacking over the recent years. So even though we might regret it, yeah, this kind of had to happen to kind of at least restore some of that consistency with Bond, because it is important. And this hypothetical situation of them staying, I think we would have been a lot worse off in the long run.
Oh, I agree. I agree. As I say before, I think this is just the shake-up that the franchise needs. And yeah, I think whatever happens, it's the perspective of where we're at now, right? So we're at this time in the Bond series where things have been really slow. They've kind of had this strange decision of ending No Time to Die like that. What's going on? No one really knows. We didn't know for a long time. And so a lot of people are sort of eager to see things. They want to see results now, want to see their favorite franchise on the screen and in a game and a book or what have you. I suppose the books have still been coming out. But anyway, and it's similar to when there's just a gap in any series, right? I keep going back to Star Wars, but if you think about when Disney bought Star Wars, that had been a long time since George Lucas had done anything with it, really. So they were like, "Oh man, I can't wait to see this new trilogy, and they're going to do this and that," and they took it with open arms, and that's kind of where I'm at now. That's me. I will just take anything I can get. So if that does mean a finger gold die tomorrow time, then
Yeah,
I'll be watching it. I'll be there. Opening night. Midnight.
Okay, I guess in terms of a optimistic scale, right? Where, how am I going to phrase this so it's not weird? Like,
No, you can be weird.
I guess how optimistic or pessimistic are you about this? I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is very optimistic and 0, I guess, is very pessimistic.
This might just
That makes sense.
It does totally make sense. This might just be more a reflection of me, maybe where I'm at now, where I'm just tired of the world being a depressing stink hole, crud bucket.
Well, the world is not enough.
The world is not enough. It really isn't. I mean, there's just a lot of bad stuff going around. So I'm seeing this positively, and I'm seeing it optimistically for sure. So I give myself a solid 8 out of 10. Maybe even 8.5.
Oh, okay, interesting. I think I'm a 7.
Okay.
Is where I'm at. Where it's like, I'm glad stuff is happening, but also I totally see the pitfalls that could totally happen. But again, I do think it's so important that the Bond franchise exists and keep moving forward. And that is something that has not been delivered. So fixing that issue, maybe we regret it in the long run, but what was the alternative,
Exactly.
I think a lot of this, what makes this painful for fans and confusing and not great, is that when George Lucas sold Disney, that was very clear and direct. It's like, I am selling you this, giving my $2 billion, I think it was, or maybe that was the Marvel deal, I can't remember. But give me all my money, and then you go and do whatever you want to do. And it was very clear. It just really sucks that we went through this period of it wasn't clear, but with hindsight, this is probably the only way it could have gone. I feel like if that decision was made 2 years ago, then we all would have just, maybe we would still be upset, and fair enough, but we could all just kind of move on and see what happens next. It's the fact that it has been dragged out for so long just to get to the exact same point, and all that has happened is that, well, nothing has happened in practical terms. So I think that makes it kind of hurt a little bit more. But also, I guess, make it more optimistic, because now the first hurdle has been cleared. It just took way too bloody long to do that.
Yeah, way too long. I'm sure Barbara Broccoli got so sick of having to answer questions about, who's the next James Bond going to be? When's the script? And then fans equally as annoyed when she would say, can't say much at the moment. So, no one was winning in that situation. As you say, I think this was just the only real step out of that. And yeah, Bond's, things had to change. You move or you die, right? So let's just see where it takes us.
Yes. I think we won't go into speculation in terms of specifics about the film, right? I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah.
At the moment, just, I think there's a lot you could talk about, like, what should it be? What should the direction be? But I think for the time being, we've talked long enough about the actual news itself. Maybe we'll come back later and give some wish lists or things we would like to see once we've had a little bit of time to like think about it, I suppose.
I've already got my wish list. I've already told Jeff about it. You know, I've got the
The
Roger Moore.
AI,
It's
Roger
already
Moore.
it's already happening.
Well, you've got the body pillow, so that's something that
just
the AI can scan in.
Exactly.
I think.
They just scanned it and it's just done the rest.
It's just made a film.
It's just popped out a film. It's great.
Just had a good 2 hours. Oh, there's a pun there about a body pillow and like a Bond title, like the body pillow who loved me or something like that.
Oh no.
There's the spy who loved a body pillow.
There you go.
Like maybe
Octopillow.
leave that
No,
there.
all right, let's leave it.
Yeah, the living body pillow.
Oh. Now, Bond, I've got a new gadget for you.
Pay attention, 007. It's just like Roger Moore. Okay, I think we'll leave it there.
I think so
Any
too.
more final thoughts before we go, Joe?
I really hope, as I say, I don't listen back to this in a few years' time and point and laugh at myself. Wish me luck.
Well, I think other people will do that for you.
Oh, okay.
So you don't need to worry about that.
That's fine.
Yeah, I don't know. We might sound like idiots. But hey, we'll be idiots that just watched a new Bond film. So that can't be all bad.